Oh, good evening. What is it? It's Friday, I know that much. The 7th of July, 2017. Um, it's no surprise that I was born in the last century. In fact, not just the last century, but the last millennium, which sort of makes me oldish. Not really old, but getting that way. I half threatened a rant or a vlog or something, call it what you will, on the subject of bullying. Now, I started recording stuff last night, and it was sort of going a bit away from where I wanted it to go, and it sounded, when I listened to it, somewhat pretentious and doesn't really fit with the Harry Faber channel. Maybe I ought to have a different channel for heavyweight rants or something. Maybe not. But in my life, I've seen and experienced and been part of a lot of bullying by power of the state, bullying by just the big kids in class bullying the little kids. And there's a funny thing with state bullying. The state organises opinions, and it causes an awful lot of pressures that bully people in certain directions. Now, while I was being all pretentious and high-blown and somewhat boring last night, I remembered an incident that is a sort of triumph over bullying. Now, there's an old thing about folk my age, do you remember where you were when you heard that John F. Kennedy had been assassinated? Now, oddly enough, I do remember where I was. I was in my grandmother's kitchen, standing in front of her washing machine, which was actually pretty ancient. And then a few years later, of course, we lived through the awful assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. You know, the guy, I Had a Dream and all that stuff. And then time passed and we became aware of a man called Nelson Mandela. Now, when I first became aware of Nelson Mandela, as far as I was concerned, he was a terrorist because the South African state said he was a terrorist, and as a young man, we accepted that the state was always right, especially when the state was made up of people who, in general terms, looked like me. And the South African state in those days looked like chaps like me. Spoke with a different accent, but the same general language. Time went on, and Nelson Mandela became an international hero, a freedom fighter, and then a great statesman. And then a man that every president, prime minister, pope, archbishop wanted to shake the hand of. Needless to say, I never met Nelson Mandela, but I do remember what I was doing around about the time that he was being changed from being a terrorist prisoner on Robben Island to being a leader of the people, to being a statesman. Now, around about that time, my mother had been diagnosed with cancer, particularly nasty cancer, which was always going to kill her. One of those that, time it's diagnosed, there ain't no treatment except palliative care. Any road up, she was in Old Church Hospital for a certain amount of that time, Old Church in Romford. And Old Church, of course, started life as part of the state system of bullying. It had been a workhouse before it became a hospital. And in those days, it was still a pretty grim, forbidding sort of place. Yeah, I never had any happy memories of the place because my father died there. My mother was diagnosed and was treated there before she passed away. Isn't it funny how we use phrases like passed away? She died, okay? Anyway, one particular day I'd gone to Old Church. Mother was there for some treatment. And I walked into, or rather, the man walked into me, and he was a man who was a friend of mine, a motor mechanic, 15, 20 years older than me, very nice guy. I never really knew his name, everyone called him Livy. Now Livy looked more like Nelson Mandela. He was a West Indian, very happy-go-lucky guy, very nice man, a good man. And Livy walked in, saw me, and sort of said, "Oh, hello, what are you doing here?" So I told him, and he said, "Oh, it's a small world." And he said, "I'm here to see my mother." And we shook hands and we chatted, and we saw our respective mothers, and we went our own way. It wasn't the last I saw of Livy. We bumped into each other quite a few times after that. But while I was sat there waiting for my mother to have her treatment, I was reading a newspaper. Don't ask me which one. And there were articles about Nelson Mandela. And something occurred to me. At that time, if we'd been in South Africa, Livy's mother would not have been treated in the same hospital as my mother. And if I'd been a South African, I would have thought that that was okay. But here's the thing. At that time in South Africa, Livy would not have been free to shake my hand. Now stand that on its head, because it isn't his freedom, it's my freedom. Just as he wouldn't have been able to shake my hand in a hospital treating his mother and my mother, I would not have been able to shake his. When one man has freedom curtailed, is bullied by the state, by classroom bullies, by workplace bullies, whatever, when one man is suffering that sort of problem, then all men are in the same position. When you take another person's freedom, you're also diminishing your own. So if you are in a situation where there is bullying, then you should stand next to the bullied. Right, was that heavy enough for you? I'm going to go and walk up and down the beach for a while, clear my head, get rid of the thoughts of the day, and then I might go and do some work on a model railway, which is a lot more fun, isn't it?